Assalamu alaikum and happy World Hijab Day. Thank you so much for joining us today. I will be the host for this session. My name is Ashley Pearson Khan. Once again, welcome. I'm so excited that today is World Hijab Day. And this is the conference, World Hijab Day Global Virtual Conference for 2025. I can't believe it's 2025, if I'm being honest, but I'd like to start off by saying a huge thank you to our platinum sponsor, Volshik, for sponsoring today's World Hijab Day Global Virtual Conference of 2025. Today, I've got some amazing guests with me. I've got Dr. Suzy Ismail. She is the founding director of Cornerstone, a global nonprofit organization. She's the author of many books. She travels nationally and internationally to speak to women on marriage, family, parenting, and more. She holds dual master's degrees and a PhD in communication and human services. She currently resides in New Jersey with her husband and 3 children. I also have Samra Ilyas, Executive Director for Government Social Services. She's a passionate volunteer, community leader, and advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion. She's been recognized for her commitment to raising awareness about racism and Islamophobia. She has been an organizer and panelist of the Anti-Racism Speaker Series on Islamophobia in the Workplace. Islamophobia and microaggressions in the workplace. Multi-award recipient, including Women of Inspiration Top 50 Under 50, and the recipient of the prestigious Queen Elizabeth II Golden Jubilee Medal for Excellence in Public Service and Leadership. These are our guests for this session, The Impact of Islamophobia on Hijabi Women. Welcome, ladies. Thank you so much for joining me. It's great to have you. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam. Thank you so much for having us here. It's an honor.
Yes, of course, of course. I'm very excited to sit down and talk to you both today. Dr. Suzy, can I start with you? I'd love to just jump in head first. All right, so easy question, hopefully. Why did you start wearing the hijab?
Assalamu alaikum. So first of all, thank you so much, Ashley, and the amazing women behind this program and putting it together and inviting us to have this conversation. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. And assalamu alaikum to our audience and to all those who are watching. So, my journey to hijab is, it may be a little bit different than some other women's journey to hijab in the choosing to wear hijab at a relatively young age. So for me, when I was in middle school, I was 10 years old, 6th grader. This was the time where school dances were starting to be a thing. And even though growing up at home, I knew as Muslims, we don't go out on dates, we don't go to school dances. There's certain, appropriate gender interactions that we maintain. And I remember in 6th grade, there was another young 6th grader who invited me to go to the dance with him. And I was so offended because my response was like, I'm Muslim, I don't go to dances, I wouldn't go out on a date. And his response was, well, how was I supposed to know that? And I remember that really impacted me as a young girl because I was like, that's right. How would anyone know that I'm Muslim? My name is Suzy. Most people don't associate that with, an Islamic name or a Middle Eastern name even. I realized that in that moment that I wanted the world to know that I was Muslim. It was a very huge part of my identity, even at that age. I loved, the association with being a Muslim, living my life as a Muslim. And I remember I went home that day and I said, I'm going to start wearing hijab. And so I started wearing hijab just simply with that intention of wanting the world to know that I'm Muslim so that nobody asks me again, well, how would I know that you're Muslim? And that was kind of my journey. And ever since then, alhamdulillah, I've always loved my hijab and, the signal it kind of gives to the world as well about my identity.
I agree. I also love that it's just kind of part of your identity. It is what identifies you as a Muslim woman. And I think for me, after I converted, that was something that was so important to me, is that I wanted everyone to know, right? Okay, so the next question is for Samara. As a visible Muslim woman and community leader. Would you share a pivotal moment that inspired your dedication to combating Islamophobia?
Yes, thank you. And just clarify, Samra.
Samra, so sorry.
No worries. But to start, just by thanking, of course, World Hijab Day for the opportunity to be part of this panel alongside many inspiring sisters, and to be able to share some of my thoughts today. I started my career in the public service in 2011, and at the time I was not wearing a hijab, which I started in 2014, and that was huge for me, first in my family, first in my workplace. I also became heavily involved in my children's school council at the time, and with my local mosque, and within the community through various initiatives. And as I got more involved, I would say there wasn't one pivotal moment, but rather maybe a culmination of many moments that inspired me to be more vocal and speak up against Islamophobia, and to raise awareness and challenge stereotypes and discriminatory behaviors and practices in the workplace. Being a visibly Muslim woman in a leadership role, many Muslim colleagues and members of the community often reached out to me, sharing instances of racism and discrimination. And I live in Western Canada, and Quebec, which is a province in Eastern Canada. In 2019, the provincial government there passed a bill that prohibits public sector employees in positions of authority from wearing religious symbols at work. Of course, primarily affecting Hijabi women like us, and Sikh men who wear turbans. Being in the public service myself for now almost 15 years, I can't imagine not doing the work I love to do because of such discriminatory laws, and to think that these type of oppressive laws exist today at such a systemic level is quite bizarre, really, I would say. We've also seen, of course, increasing instances of Islamophobia across the world. And closer to home for me in Canada, there was, the Quebec terror attack in a mosque in 2017, another attack on a young Muslim family out for a walk in Ontario in 2021, various attacks on Hijabi sisters on the local transit and in public spaces. And I had many Muslim employees telling me that they felt unsafe even coming into work due to not feeling safe taking the transit. So I guess realizing these systemic issues that exist, as well as how influenced people are by political rhetoric and so much ignorance and misinformation that exists, is what drives my commitment and motivation to do my part. I also have 2 children of my own, and many youth in my network and community and at my workplace that are highly ambitious. And I, as all of us, I think, want them to grow up in a world where they believe they can achieve and surpass their dreams, while being proud of what they represent and knowing that being visibly Muslim is a strength, not a barrier. We also can't allow Islamophobia to limit or define our success. And I'll just end this question, I guess, with a quote that resonates with me, and it's from the current Canadian Prime Minister, which he shared at the 4th anniversary of the Quebec mosque shooting, which resonates with me. And he said that the fight against Islamophobia isn't just about resisting hate, it's about paving the way for future generations to walk into any space with confidence, knowing that they belong. Thank you.
That's an amazing response. I think, as you were talking, I was thinking, we did just recognize that anniversary of the Quebec mosque shooting, and I know that our prime minister, maybe he's not always well liked around the world, but that's powerful quote. And that's, what we do here at World Hijab Day is we're constantly trying to get people to understand, hijab, and so that when they see us, they aren't questioning, us and our motives, and like why are these women wearing this and everything. And so I think that's really powerful what you said. Okay, Dr. Suzy, have you ever faced incidents of Islamophobia while wearing hijab?
So, I love this question because sometimes when we think of Islamophobia, we think of, a very blatant, in-your-face form of attack or slurs that are given. But sometimes they can be more in the forms of microaggressions. A phobia is a fear. And, the idea of Islamophobia is one who fears the faith of Islam. So just recently, literally just a few weeks ago, I was speaking at an Islamic conference in Atlanta, Georgia. And it was in a huge convention center. And so the convention center had kind of two different sections. But to get to the Islamic conference side, you had to walk through another side that was being used by, I believe it was like the National Cheerleader Championship or something of that sort. And so walking from my hotel room into the area where the Islamic conference was being held, I had to pass by this cheerleader situation that was happening. And as I was walking through one morning, one of the very young cheerleaders, and they were all like different teams, different ages, and it looked like maybe the youngest group, like girls who were like 4, 5, 6 years old, maybe. They were dressed in their little cheerleading outfits, a lot of skin exposed, a lot of makeup on their face. And as I walked by, one of the little girls, turned to kind of like stare at me, and she pointed and she asked her mom, she said, what is that? What is she wearing? And her mom just kind of turned her away, and she had this look on her face of like, this is so embarrassing, stop pointing. And so she pulled her daughter away a little bit, but the daughter was insistent and she kept turning, towards me. And so I had smiled and, I kind of nodded my head, and the little girl said, it's beautiful. And then the mom just said, shush, 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 kind of like, don't embarrass me. And then, the little girl kind of followed up and she said, I want to wear that. And, in that moment, subhanAllah, I just kept thinking that there is a natural fitra that our children tend to have that leans towards that element of haya, that characteristic of modesty that is inherent in our deen. And I see it so often with children in particular, children who see the beauty in hijab, children who recognize that, different isn't something to be scared of. And in that moment, it really drove home to me as well that the conceptualization or the fear of Islam, in particularly when it comes to women who wear hijab, is built on, societal elements that have unfortunately bred this fear that takes you away from that natural fitra of seeing the beauty of hijab. And very often it's our children who tend to speak that truth. So in that moment, I could see kind of the fear in the mother's face and other parents, as I walked by, and maybe they didn't verbalize it, but I think it's a common look that we'll often get. And, because I do tend to travel quite a bit, a lot of areas in the US. I live on the East Coast, which alhamdulillah is very saturated with diversity. But as I travel to other states, and especially in the wake of our new administration, I definitely do see more of those looks, more of those microaggressions, more of those comments that are said under the breath. And I think that all ties into that fear and that Islamophobia that we see.
Yes, as soon as you said Georgia, I thought, I don't know how many Muslims there are there. I grew up in the South. I grew up in Arkansas, and when I converted and I was wearing hijab, I got a lot of stares because even though there were Muslims and small masjids, people weren't very visible. I mean, before I was Muslim, I didn't see those Muslims at the grocery store and things like that. And so I did get a lot of stares. And, I kind of wish in those moments where a child is like, oh, what is that? Like very curious, that a parent would be like, do you want to ask this person a question? And like, maybe, just kind of open that door. But I don't think that A, people think of those things, and B, maybe they, they don't know how the person's going to react, but I think it's a teaching moment in a way. I even, I used to go out into like public schools and things. And I actually had a girl come up to me and ask me, like where I was from and about my hijab. She didn't know what to call it. And she ended up wanting to take a picture with me. So it's very, very interesting. But I wish we had more of those moments where people asked us questions so we could teach them on the spot like that. But maybe someday. Okay, Samara. I said that right.
Samra.
Samra. I was like, I'm going to have to hear it again. Samra. I've got it. I promise. I'm so sorry. Okay, next question for you is, how has the landscape of Islamophobia evolved since you began your advocacy work, especially the impact on hijab-wearing women?
Yeah, so I would say landscape has shifted, maybe both in both the challenges and responses. So while there has been increased awareness and pushback against anti-Muslim discrimination, hijab-wearing women, I think, remain amongst the most visible and vulnerable targets of Islamophobia in workplaces, schools, spaces, and even when it comes to policymaking. And Islamophobia is often blatant and direct with verbal attacks, hate crimes, and physical assaults, like I previously mentioned. But over time, it's also become more systemic and embedded in policies and institutions, making it sometimes harder to recognize and challenge. We've seen hijab bans in workplaces and schools in some countries under that guise of neutrality and secularism, such as with that law in Quebec. And the intent, I think, of such laws is to impact a hijabi woman's ability to fully participate in society. We see things like increased airport profiling. I mean, who hasn't been always randomly selected for screening every time they go through airport security? But, we do see people around us stepping up to. I travel a lot for work and often with non-Muslim colleagues, and I'm always the one that gets selected randomly. But while we may begin to normalize these things and kind of shrug it off, my non-Muslim colleagues are now the ones that are questioning this. Of course, social media has become both tools for advocacy and a platform for hate, with the misinformation, conspiracy theories, anti-Muslim propaganda that spreads more rapidly, fueling bias. But despite that, I would say hijabi women have also used social media to reclaim narratives, build solidarity, and challenge discrimination in real time. And World Hijab Day is, of course, a great live example of this. We also see more hijabi women in leadership, CEOs, politicians, activists, and professionals that are breaking barriers every day. We see more corporate diversity initiatives ensuring hijabi women are represented and respected in workplaces. And lastly, I would say that the landscape of Islamophobia has changed, but so has the resistance against it. We've become leaders, role models, and change makers, and are shaping policies, leading discussions, and hopefully redefining narratives.
Amazing. Thank you for the work that you both do. I definitely think we probably all have an airport story, especially those of us who wear hijab, or if you have a certain name. My husband's name is Imran Khan, and he can never check in early. He's always got like an extra screening, bless him. So, Dr. Suzy, how has Islamophobia most recently manifested towards women in hijab? Oh, I'm sorry. You are muted. There you go.
Okay. I was saying, I think this is a very timely question, particularly here in the US. The past, it's only been about 11 or 12 days, but I think it's felt like a lifetime for many of us here in the US under the Trump administration. Islamophobia is definitely rearing its head quite a bit again. We saw a shift in tone, and I think in feeling towards Muslim communities throughout the world post October 7th, of the start of the Gaza tragedy, the Gaza genocide that occurred. And we started seeing particularly Muslim women, and I speak from the US particularly, Muslim women in places, in spaces, facing greater harassment, facing greater issues that can cause very real fear, safety concerns online, just unfortunately rancid hatred being pushed towards visible Muslim women. And this is something that unfortunately we're anticipating an increase in, because whenever you have a government that is spewing hateful rhetoric towards anyone of a diverse background, anyone who chooses to practice their faith out loud, and it is a faith that's not the dominant one practiced in that country, we tend to see a significant rise in the equivalent kind of hatred and negativity coming from the people of the country as well. So I would say, currently we are seeing increased Islamophobia, particularly towards those who are forced migrants, towards refugees, the massive deportations that are occurring. We are seeing people being stopped simply based on, the color of their skin or the hijab that they're wearing, people who are citizens, people who are rightfully here in this country. And unfortunately, again, we haven't even completed the first 2 weeks under our new administration, but we are seeing more and more of this negative backlash. So the hope is that, as a Muslim community, as an ummah, whether here in the US or Canada or the UK or anywhere in the world, that we do band together and we recognize that, it isn't easy at this time to be visibly Muslim, but it never has been. And this kind of aligns with the hadith of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam that reminds us that to be a Muslim is to be like a stranger and glad tidings to those who are strangers. And so, yes, we may feel like strangers very often in countries that are not a majority Muslim, and being a stranger can sometimes make you feel ostracized, but this is part of the beauty of remaining steadfast on our deen and ensuring that we keep moving forward in seeking the pleasure of Allah in how we carry ourselves, how we dress, how we speak, the spaces we speak in, and not shying away from being in those spaces simply because of the hateful rhetoric that may be, coming our way from those who fear diversity, who fear faith, who fear those who answer to a higher power than just the government.
Yes, well said. I think, it's like as soon as the government changed in the US, it just was like a complete shift, and that happens. And I think sometimes it is unfortunate that we seem to be going backwards at times. Okay. It just blows my mind, and so like now I'm like stuck on that for a moment, because it's absolutely crazy what's going on, and the laws that are being written, and the things that are just kind of being thrown out that progress was being made, and now it's not. So okay, Samra. I'm just gonna question myself every time I say your name, but I think I've got it now. Okay, so I would like to know, what strategies have you found most effective in educating organizations about creating inclusive environments for hijabi women?
Yeah, and I really like this question because, it's about the actions we can take, and just going back to what the powerful message from Dr. Suzy and your reactions to that. I think it can be easy to, see what's going on around us and feel like we are going backwards, but that's why it's even more important for us to continue to do what we're doing and take more actions to continue to fight with what's going on. And, I think today, there's still many organizations and workplaces and, that lack awareness of the unique challenges that are faced by hijabi women. Being in a senior leadership role within my organization, I've always felt a sense of responsibility, maybe to leverage my standing in the organization to increase awareness and create opportunity for others. The public service here in Alberta is quite large. It's about 30,000 or so employees. And I'm one of many leaders, I think, in the system. But when I was promoted, or anytime I've been featured in any way through leadership articles or recognition, I've been overwhelmed by the responses I receive from many Muslim employees and colleagues that I've never met and don't know, who just appreciated seeing representation of a hijabi woman at the senior leadership level. That representation and having a seat at the table, wherever that is maybe a strategy in itself, because it gives us the opportunity little by little to create awareness and educate and maybe lead some change. I do try to raise awareness that, diversity is strength, not a checkbox, because we know how a lot of people feel about that. And I think that true inclusion does lead to better employee engagement and retention. So that's a message that we drive in our organizations. One of the key strategies for me, and Dr. Suzy talked a little bit about this too, is to educate. I've been involved in hosting many information sessions at my workplace, in community, to educate community leaders, political leaders, educators, other organizations. And as part of, a DE&I speaker series, I was involved in organizing a session on Islamophobia and microaggressions, which, we had close to 1,000 people attend, which is the highest turnout for any of the sessions in that series. Little things to make a big difference in terms of strategies. I've implemented a DE&I toolkit for policy changes to ensure that a DE&I lens is always applied to any policy development. I'm involved in employee resource groups, providing mentorship, being a champion for department DE&I committees. And so while these strategies or initiatives might not be primarily focused on hijabi women, I believe that true inclusion means making every space a space where all women, hijabi or not, can thrive. And I think it's powerful, even more powerful, when hijabi women like us are driving this inclusion and this change. So I think strategies, can sound like a big word, but I think it's the small actions that we take every day, whether it's in the workplace or out in the community, that continues to make that difference.
I agree with you, and I think it's really interesting that so many people, were reaching out to you and they saw you, because you never know who's watching, in a way, and who you'll inspire. And it's really cool that people saw you, and I'm sure that they were very inspired and thought, I can do this, and it just probably helped their mindset and everything. Okay, Dr. Suzy. Let's see. What can Muslims do to counter the negative stereotypes of hijab?
Okay, making sure I'm unmuted, but I think I am now.
Good to go.
So, this is a great question. A lot of times we think about stereotypes impacting us because they're external, being placed towards us. But the reality is that, especially for our youth, sometimes we can begin to internalize the biases and the stereotypes that are placed towards us and act in a way which, Cornel West in his book, Race Matters, had coined the term the nihilistic threat. When we start to believe that we are less than, when we start to buy into that negative messaging and start to think that, we don't belong in this country, or we don't carry ourselves in the same way that others may, or that we don't belong in these spaces, or, I love the little hashtag Hijabi is unsilenced for this program. When we recognize that those stereotypes are being born out of pure fear and ignorance, when we recognize that we have voices and Allah Azza wa Jal has commanded us to speak out against oppression, to use our voices for good, to ensure that those voices are heard, because this is how we call people to La ilaha illallah. That's one of the critical components. So what can Muslims do to kind of counteract those stereotypes? First, don't believe them. Push back against them. Make sure that the voice inside of you is the voice that tells you that you are honored, that you are blessed, that being part of this Muslim ummah is in itself something of great value, and that your deen is what carries you through. So first, don't believe the stereotypes. Second, we've talked a little bit about educating. I know a lot of the MSAs will have great little pins or stickers, especially on World Hijab Day, that says, "Ask me about my hijab." A lot of organizations, this is something over the past few years that I've seen, particularly on college campuses, where on Hijab Day, they will ask people who are not Muslim to try wearing a hijab, to walk a mile in the shoes of someone who does wear hijab and feel what that feels like. And this is the way that we breed empathy, we breed understanding, we implement that education. I'm a child of the 80s, so we didn't grow up with a World Hijab Day or a Muslim Women's Month or anything of that sort. And for many of us, in that sphere, we kind of had to find our own path. Alhamdulillah, we've come, such a long way and so far. And the hope is, as Sister Samra was saying, continue to move forward, continue to recognize the beauty in our hijab and continue to wear it proudly, because it is a part of who we are as Muslim women.
Very well said. Very well said. Well, unfortunately, we're getting down to time here. We're running out of time. So I'll start with you, Sister Samra. If there's any words of inspiration you have to offer, maybe young hijabis or someone who's just putting on the hijab, or any woman who's facing hardship in their hijab, if there's a piece of advice you could offer.
Yeah, I think the message is to young hijabi women, or all hijabi women, is just one of strength, resilience, and empowerment. I think it's important to own your own narrative and, really believe that hijab is a symbol of identity, faith, and strength, and redefine what it means to us, not society. So when you do step into places where bias or misconceptions exist, walk with confidence, knowing that your presence is valuable and that you belong. Educate yourself about your rights and be prepared to challenge stereotypes. because Islamophobia often stems from ignorance. So use your voice to share your story, correct misinformation, and build bridges at the same time where possible. But also remember that it's not your burden to educate everyone. And so set boundaries and protect your peace of mind too. One of the most important things I've learned is to, just lead with heart and excellence and let your skills, your achievements, and your leadership speak louder than any bias that you face. Because your success, I think, is the most powerful response to those that underestimate you. And it will help dismantle, I think, the stereotypes and create pathways for those that come after you. And when I say leadership, I don't mean just people in a leadership role. I think everybody is a leader. I think every hijabi woman is a leader. I would say that believe in your power to inspire, because we're breaking barriers every single day. Our presence in spaces where people like us were once excluded is already an act of resistance. So stay proud, stay strong, and keep paving the way for the next generation. And at the end of the day, just remember that your hijab really is your crown, and your voice is your power.
Amazing advice. Is there anything you would like to add, Dr. Suzy?
So I think, my final message is just to all of us as women, those who wear hijab, those who want to wear hijab, those who wore hijab and were unable to continue wearing it. Sometimes we can be our own worst enemies within our Muslim ummah. And so this is, a message first and foremost to myself, but also to all my sisters out there. Yes, hijab is one part of what it means to be a Muslim woman. And it's an important part of what it means to be a Muslim woman, because it's a pathway towards pleasing Allah. And there are many different pathways that we take in our lives to please Allah. But one of the strongest and most powerful tools, I think, in lifting ourselves and our voices is banding together as sisters, as truly one part of Ummah Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we can only do that if we drop our judgment, if we step away from, pointing fingers at each other, and truly together as sisters, as women, again, those who wear hijab, those who struggle with their hijab, those who want to wear it, or those who wore it, coming together and recognizing that our goal is to please Allah, and we're all striving and we all struggle in different areas. And if this is your struggle, don't be put off by it. Keep striving, and inshallah, may Allah make all of our paths easy on this difficult journey of life.
You both give amazing advice, and you're both amazing speakers and doing great work. And we appreciate, you guys combating Islamophobia. That's what we're always trying to do, and make the hijab, acceptable. Everybody, we want to be accepted and understood, right? And we thank you for your work. And I just want to thank you, everybody at World Hijab Day. Thank you so much for joining us. And I appreciate you sitting down to talk with me today.
Thank you.
Jazakallahu khair. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. And that concludes this session, but we've got another session coming up that you don't want to miss in just a few minutes. But I wanted to once again thank our sponsor for today's conference. Our sponsor is Volchic. Thank you so much for sponsoring. They are our platinum sponsor for this World Hijab Day Global Virtual Conference for 2025. And I have been your host, Ashley Pearson Khan. I will see you all again soon, but stay tuned. We've got 2 more sessions for you. We'll see you. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for joining.